DBX isn't a show I care about usually, but its newest season's finished, and to my surprise, I actually want to talk about some of the episodes. Though I don't have as much to say on a good few of them, but I might as well cover my thoughts on the whole season. Also, this is just going to be a chronological covering of the episodes, not a ranking like I usually do. I'll save that for the end. This is also going to be judging based off the YouTube releases only. I haven't seen most of the alternate endings and I don't really care enough to seek them out. Nemesis is also doing a video like this, so go watch his one as well. Alright, now let's start off with this season's first episode.
Now introducing my new legally mandated co-host. You know him, you love him!
Well, given how other season premieres for this show have been, Gogeta vs Vegito could have been a whole lot worse off. I like the analysis here, I guess. It has some solid jokes, but not a whole lot. And the fight is similar levels of just fairly solid. I think it's very well animated and it feels really fast. Unfortunately, the attacks don't feel super impactful since the sound design is ass. I'm also generally not a fan of how these sprites look. The fight has its moments though. I like Vegito splitting the Kamehameha. I like the attacks that spin the earth around, even if it's weird that other stronger attacks don't do the same. The fake out Kamehameha was funny, and I really like the reality break at the end, despite how much the sprites clash with Chuck Segata and Ringmaster. That's pretty much all that stands out to me. I'm not a fan of the death. I like what they were going for with the reference to Gogeta vs Janemba, but it also kinda portrays Vegito as a weak little bitch. These sprites for Gogeta here just don't look right at all either. One last thing before I move on to the next episode, because I'm already bored of talking about this one. I wish Gogeta didn't go blue. That way they could have felt more distinct instead of just being more of the same on both sides.
Well, MatPat's getting ready for his big flex.
I cannot fucking believe that MatPat is directly responsible for a DBX. And one that sadly I did not like. Well, I didn't like the fight anyway, the analysis was solid enough and I liked some of the jokes. And it ends with Boomstick having a heated gamer moment, which was great. Then the fight happens and they lose me completely. It's so slow, Ness doesn't get to use any of his powers in interesting ways, and that's about the gist of it. It just is a DBX, I guess. What disappoints me the most though is that Sans doesn't get to make any puns or anything. You have a character with as much personality as Sans and he stays completely mute. This is like the one character you can do this much with that you wouldn't need a voice actor for, and you just have him say nothing? I think this is what's disappointed me most all season. I mean, I like some things. Occasionally they'll have their powers bounce off each other's in some semi-interesting ways. I like the Undertale and Earthbound HUDs at the start. Visually the fight's very nice. The death is okay. Yeah, I have nothing to say. Like I said before, this just is a DBX and there's nothing else interesting about it.
My comfort character Ryu.
Naruto vs Ryu would have gotten like a 4 or a 5 out of 10 for the fight. Because while I think there are some occasionally cool scenes and some good rigging, there's a lot of jank and I forget about pretty much everything as it's happening. The worst part's the death, which is Naruto obliterating Ryu with a regular Rasengan somehow, even though he survived multiple charged ones from his Kurama form without any bother before. Once again, I have next to nothing to say about the fight. I really didn't care for it. But the analysis was actually pretty good. I like the dynamic between Ringmaster and Wiz much more than Ringmaster and Boomstick. I feel like their personalities are better suited generally to playing off each other. One actively tries to avoid research while the other cherishes it. It seemed inevitable that there would be some funny interactions there. I really just don't have any strong opinions on these episodes, do I? They've all just been kinda there. Wait, so then why do I have best season in the title?
Let's see how much.
Oh,
that's not
that's not as bad as that. That was closer than that.
Like
Yo!
Oh no, this is something I can get behind.
finally, some action!
Given that this match is such a big inside joke amongst my friend group, you'd probably expect this to be the longest segment. But I'm actually going to give this episode its own video at some point. I'm even planning to have a special guest on for it. Whether that's down to how much I liked the episode or just for the sake of the bit is up for you to decide.
I am sad to have seen a duck die, but I am still satisfied with these results.
Now we're getting into the real bangers of the season. Donald vs Daffy is exactly what I would want from a sprite battle between these two characters. They have the cartoony gags and slapstick down so well in this animation to the point where I'd probably call it the funniest DBX so far. From obvious stuff like the fake out at the start, the other ducks joining the fray and bugs at the end, to smaller details like the sun having a face, Daffy disappearing into the background during his laughing fit, and the Juggernaut vs Hermione thumbnail. I also love the title card at the start. They're taking cues from the right episode, so it would seem. This fight has passion the likes of which DBX hasn't seen since Bendy vs Cuphead. I don't love it nearly as much as that episode, but this is still one of the highlights of the show by a long shot. The fighting is fun, the jokes land, the sprites are super expressive in spite of their low bit count. What even is there to hold this back from a 10? Well, there's the voice acting, which is sadly my one major negative with it. I don't care for Donald's voice, though that's less because of the impression and more because I find Donald's voice inherently grating to listen to for too long. Daffy's though, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it. I think he captures Daffy's laugh really well, but I don't like the bits where it's just him talking normally. He sounds like he's got a blocked nose the whole time. That's probably why I don't prefer this over the multiverse match, since their Daffy voice was more or less flawless, though it is still very close between them. I guess it just depends on what you're after, fun cartoony slapstick or over the top fighting. Both do both things well, though each of them clearly does one of those better than the other. Oh yeah, and the analysis was good too. Easily my favourite of the Boomstick trilogy. This is an incredible episode through and through, and I was prepared to call it my favourite of the season since DBX tends to only get one real banger per year. That is, until...
Zuko might have been an admirable bender and adorable fan favorite.
something that wasn't this. I liked Zuko vs. Roy, though not really for the fight. Not that it was bad, I still generally liked it, much more than any of the Avatar Death Battle episodes. The animation feels a lot faster, and while it does have the frame rate issue I criticised Blake vs. Mikasa for, I never minded it quite as much here. The choreography is solid, I like this bit of hand to hand, Zuko flying was cool, nothing outstanding, but nothing I outright dislike until the death, which is way funnier than I think was intended. Zuko runs up while screaming, disarms Roy, and then cuts off his head. It's a bit shit, innit? The analysis is what brings us up from like a 6 for me. I like how Ringmaster and Dummy play off each other. The most and least eccentric hosts have a really fun dynamic. And even when one of them has a joke that I don't find funny, the other delivers a response that picks up the slack. Usually the Dummy skits on Death Battle aren't up my alley, but this episode might have him at his best. I'm glad he got to do more. I'm also glad they didn't repeat the pattern and have Wiz host this one since Boomstick was on the last one. I don't think anyone wanted Wiz on another Zuko episode.
Beer Squirrel's my dad.
That's right, Boomstick.
Back to the usual, huh? Once again, this episode's highlight is the analysis. Ringmaster slipping into insanity out of sheer loneliness has him bring out cardboard cutouts of Wiz and Boomstick who he tries to impersonate, and it's funnier than a lot of the cutaways in actual Death Battle. Why? The fight is just alright. I like Mercury's corpse exploding at the end, this one shot of Billy being sent across the lake is solid, the rest is well animated if uninteresting combat with awful sound design and sprites that clash horribly. Also, there's some 2D stuff which I think is custom hand-drawn, which looks like it would be good if it was not rendered in the most horribly crusty quality possible. You know, I decided to do this video because I wanted to talk about the peaks of the season, but I did not realise how little I'd have to say about the rest. So let's get into one of those peaks, shall we?
And Grey Fox absolutely destroys Snake Eyes. Total blitz. Like no diff.
Give the SFM team Star Wars and they shall deliver. Actually, this one was just Devil Artemis, so that's even more impressive. Shame it had to be cut so short because this is an amazing animation that I could totally see fitting in as a full-on death battle. The lightsaber to Keyblade combat's really well done, and it differentiates itself from Yoda vs King Mickey by focusing more on their different powers. Sheev has his lightning, and Xehanort has all manners of different spells from barriers to ice to explosions. It helps it not feel like more of the same. The voice acting is also stellar, especially on Palpy's end. I did not know Liam had a good Sheev impression up his sleeve, but the more you know. His final line before he heads out and leaves Xehanort to die in the vacuum of space is great as well, even though he shouldn't know why that line means anything, but who cares. Speaking of sounding great, Heartless Empire by Brandon Yates is the one custom track they used this season. Luckily someone commissioned him for it because it's so good and helps add to the fight a lot, even if I wouldn't listen to all 11 minutes of it on its own. This could have easily gotten a 9 if the analysis didn't stink. I like Devil Artemis, but his sense of humour can be pretty hit or miss for me. The analysis does have some hits, but unfortunately there are a lot of misses. I don't care for the dynamic between Ringmaster and Cell at all. I think Sheev's analysis had some okay jokes, but Xehanort's was just blank nothingness. A great analysis could have maybe even pushed this up from a 9 to a 10, but sadly it's what drags it down to just a really high 8. I say that as if a really high 8 is not a great score to have. But enough about what could have been a 10, onto what actually is a 10.
Oh man, I thought this was gonna suck! That was awesome! Who knew those little fuckers could fight like that?
Goomba vs. Koopa has a good analysis. They have to use footage from a Mario 64 mod, which I find funny, and also Jocelyn's there, that's cool, whatever. The fight is what steals the show here, and that is an upsetting rarity for this season. I'm gonna do a full scene-by-scene breakdown because this fight honestly deserves it, it's that good. So we have a funny setup countered out by an unfunny JoJo's face, which is the only part of this animation I actively dislike. And it only lasts a single shot. This is a good sign of what's to come. The first bit of the fight is just a better version of the slap fight from Donald vs. Daffy, followed by the first real hit of the animation. I like how they seemingly intentionally don't have this hit feel super impactful, since they still have to build up to the real fighting later on. The Goomba gets the attack selection from the Mario and Luigi RPGs, and their attacks even have the damage numbers in the same sound design from those games, which again feels like it's still weak on purpose to help it build up. We get references to two previous death battles, both the end of the original Goomba vs. Koopa where the Goomba kicks the Koopa's shell, and that one bit in Mario vs. Sonic with the delayed bob-omb explosion that sends them flying. After the explosion, the tone of the fight takes a complete 180 out in the Rainy Mushroom Kingdom with some fairly intense music playing. Things finally feel like they're starting to pick up with the Koopa going for a shell spin attack much faster than anything from before. And then the Goomba takes flight to bomb the Koopa with micro Goombas in what's a really funny scene that ends with the Koopa ripping off one of their heads. That's brutal and I love it. The Koopa takes flight too, and we finally start scraping the tip of the iceberg in terms of how far this episode goes. They're rushing at each other with much meatier sound design, their clashes cause a lightning strike, and they even go so fast the time looks like it's completely stopped. And yet we still aren't even close to how insane this fight gets. I love this scene right after where the Koopa grabs the Goomba, spins in its shell, and then we get this super satisfying wind up before they just let it rip and throw the Goomba into the horizon and through Bowser's ship. This is giving me major deja vu for another Versus animation, but I cannot for the life of me put my finger on what it is. Maybe it'll come to me later, I don't know. The Goomba retaliates by pushing a piece of the destroyed ship back at the Koopa, who in turn just smashes their way through it. Weaponizing the ship is not only a good way to incorporate the environment into their fight, but having them both smash through it effortlessly shows a significant increase in the scale of the battle. I thought this bit after the Koopa tackles the Goomba to the ground would be the end of the fight initially, but no, we're still nowhere near done. The Koopa's out of its shell and we get this incredible first person shot of the destruction their fights caused, followed by them walking back over to their shell in this shot which looks really depressing, but in a good way. This looks like the kind of thing you'd find in an action movie or something like that. The Goomba returns in their green boot and the music starts going somehow even harder than before. The Koopa finds their car just lying around for some reason, and we get this intense moment of the car driving forward at full speed, so fast that tears start flowing from the Koopa's eyes. And then it gets its shell back from an item box. I like how this scene plays into their unique gear. Since before the only difference was that one of them could use baby bombs and the other had a shell, they both get to use stuff that's specific to them, since only the Goombas have ever had the Karibo shoe, and only the Koopa's been playable in Mario Kart. The Koopa gets a cool moment to use strategy which I liked, where they send their car forward to make the Goomba jump before pelting them with their new shell and then putting it back on. Things start to pick up even further following some great hand-drawn face shots, where the Goomba sends the Koopa all the way around the planet like 20 times in a single kick. And the Koopa's able to turn that around by using the momentum from the kick to make their shell attacks hit even harder. But then the Goomba turns it back around on them and uses the green shoe to stop the Koopa dead in their tracks and launch them all the way to the moon. And then that plays into the Koopa shell bouncing off surfaces as it comes back in full swing after leaving a crater in the moon, which I am sure is a reference to One Punch Man, so this gets bonus points. And the scene that follows of the constant faster than light pinballing of the shell between the moon and the Goomba's shoe as it starts to shatter not just the moon but reality itself in a way even more impactful than in Hulk vs. Broly. It's just incredible. In any lesser episode this would have been the highlight, but this is not a lesser episode. The momentum picked up by the Koopa shell becomes so great that it starts shattering dimensional barriers and starts travelling back in time through sheer force. And we get a cameo from Sonic and Flash travelling through dimensions, Booster Gold being punched into 1,000,000 next weeks, and a bloodied and beaten Hal Jordan travelling back in time. And the fact that they've now retconned Ben vs. Hal to where Hal was given the idea of the green boot finisher from the Goomba's Karibo shoe, this moment's honestly perfect, I love it so much. Everything about it lined up so well. Congrats, you've retroactively made Ben vs. Hal a better episode. And it's all topped off with the Koopa blasting back to the start of the fight, which even Ringmaster's confused about, the momentum of all the Goomba's repeated moonkicks giving it a rainbow glow, and they deliver the finisher of a full power stomp to the head which splatters the Goomba into a puddle of blood. I wish it could have been a more destructive final blow, but we get a second Ben vs. Hal reference which made me smile, so I can't be too disappointed. What an episode. This has single-handedly restored my interest in DBX. I have borderline zero issues with it, and my massive rambly recap still didn't cover everything. Like how well it's paced, the amazing rigging, and how the sprites are so expressive they put Donald vs. Daffy to shame. I am so glad this episode went as hard as it did, because it delivered on the only other DBX to come even close to Bendy vs. Cuphead for me. Not only is this being a 10 out of 10 in my eyes super impressive given I'm not that into DBX as a show, but it being a 10 out of 10 sprite fight is even more so. I love what the Death Battle sprite team do, but Shredder vs. Silver Samurai and the Mega Man Battle Royale are probably the only sprite battles I'd give that 10 out of 10 score to. This being the episode to complete the Holy Trinity is really funny, and I'm glad this was able to end off the season on such a high note. So, how was the season overall? Well, upon a rewatch, I think this is easily the best DBX season. Considering the show getting banger episodes is usually a yearly event by this point, this season giving us at least 3 of them, with me still liking most of the rest of the season overall, is a huge step up from previous seasons frequently either being mediocre or actively shitting the bed. I didn't dislike a single episode this season. I disliked 2 of the fight scenes, but the analysis segments for once were good enough to boost their scores. Oh yeah, speaking in the analysis segments, I enjoyed almost all of them this season, which is a first. Ringmaster having someone to play off in every episode certainly helped. I mean, I know he didn't physically have anyone there with him in Sailor Mercury vs. Blue Ranger, but I'm counting his crippling loneliness as a co-host on technicality. If you want a ranking of the episodes, well, the scores I gave to each of them should make my ranking pretty clear. Between the 3 episodes I gave a 6 out of 10 to, I think Sailor Mercury vs. Blue Ranger is the best one, Gogeta vs. Vegito follows somewhat closely behind, and then Naruto vs. Ryu is only just barely scraping into that tier. I'm going to close things off now because this has been too much DBX talk for one lifetime. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this, go watch Nem's video if you haven't, I'll see you later.